So Rhinal, I think I'm right in saying you've still yet to practice Aikido on the mat. Am I right?
I haven't, no, I haven't practiced yet on a mat.
Okay. So I'm kind of interested how you found, you really have been amazingly active online. You've been visiting quite a few classes, I know that, for quite a while. What brought you to Aikido in the first place?
So there's a number of things, but mainly I have a charity called the Pursuit of Happiness, and I wanted to walk the River Ganges, and I had some concerns about walking in India on my own as a woman, and especially because I've been followed and attacked quite a few times. So I wanted to learn self-defense, but more of a peaceful, compassionate like way of doing it, and only if I absolutely had to. So rather more as a way of getting myself out of the situation, rather than trying to hurt anybody. So Aikido made sense for me, and actually as well, I did some trauma therapy for some of my experiences. And I talked to the counselor about it, and he said that it was a very good idea, because like memory is often held in the body, and Aikido is a good way of working with that, and especially because of where some of my trauma had come from.
Right.
So yeah, it worked out really well, actually, because it was in my head, but I didn't really know where to start in terms of looking for classes. And then lockdown happened, and then I started looking online, and then I found Charles's class. So I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, that would be great. So I got in touch with Charles and I spoke to him. And yeah, and then I started with Charles for quite a few weeks, and then expanded out, and yeah, and then I think I had 5 different teachers, and like I was doing Aikido like 6 times a week for most of lockdown. But yeah, it was a really interesting experience that actually ended up being much more than what I intended. So my intentions were for self-defense. But I actually found it a really, like a safe space energetically, especially during the pandemic period, because, I think because I meditate a lot as well, I can feel like a lot of energy and vibrations, and, there's just like a lot of negativity going around. And I just found like during the Aikido classes, other than my meditation, it was a time when I could be in like, a space where the energy was just much more calmer. And I could come back to myself and feel more centered. And yeah, so I found it really calming as well.
So from what I know of you, a lot of what we do in Aikido, the ideas and principles behind it chimed with you anyway. But I'm interested to know what Aikido, you've just said it gave you calmness perhaps, and it gave you a space to create some positive energy in negative times. But what else has Aikido, if anything, given you?
So it's interesting. I had a lot of challenges over, the last couple of years, the last year specifically, with things that I had to face. So I had quite a big, I had a scam case, and it was quite a lot of money, and I basically had to like fight with the bank over it. And it was really because it was quite a lot of money, and I don't earn a lot of money. It initially caused me like a panic attack. So that created quite a big distress in itself. And then it was like the universe was aligning, and I started doing the after Brandon did a class with Charles, and I was really interested in what he was doing, and as well because I work in counseling. And I started doing his classes on Saturday, and it was like every class I was doing on Saturday with him was mirroring what I was going through with the bank and how they were responding to me. And so some of the frameworks he was talking about, so I remember in one class he said the baseline for many people is when they're when they don't respond to you, it's because they want you to disconnect. And I was kind of like, oh, that makes sense, like with my bank situation. And then with other situations as well, just like the principles, for example, walking alongside your partner. So another situation I had with an employer who hadn't paid me, and they were just, coming up with all these things. And then I decided, I thought, okay, I'm just going to walk alongside them. And so I went with the argument that they were giving me. And then it just turned out that actually by going with their argument, they owed me more money than what I was like trying to claim from them. So they were just kind of like, oh, maybe we'll just give you what you originally wanted. And I was like, wow, you've already said it now. So, if this is what you're saying, then let's go with that. And, I'm quite happy to accept £2,000 more, if that's what you're saying. But it came from this principle of walking alongside your partner rather than, getting into a tussle and trying to fight your point of view.
Right. So I've been preaching a gospel of Aikido for daily life for a very long time. And that's exactly where you started. So your practice, because you can't practice on the mat, has had to be in daily life. And it's lovely to hear it's been so powerful for you.
Yeah. And I think I learned in terms of the power of the principles, like of Aikido, but it's also, I think you're aware of this because you put mindfulness in your practice, but it's also, there are parallels with like meditation and mindfulness. And so, like a really powerful kind of experience that I had when I was in Latin America was that I was attacked by somebody, or I was cornered by somebody, and I had no way of escaping. And it was like my fight and flight defense mechanisms all came to the surface, and I looked around for an exit, like, how am I going to get out of here? And all my things were everywhere, and it was the middle of the night, we were in the middle of nowhere. And then from my meditation practice, I was able to, it happened unconsciously, not consciously, I was able to come back to center in the situation. And then just intuitively, I looked the person in the eyes and I appealed to their heart. And I was kind of like, you're not like this. Like, are you really going to go ahead with this kind of a thing? And just by talking to him, calm the situation down. And then there was this really clear moment where the look of aggression and like domination like switched, and he turned on the light, saw the tears like coming down my face. And then he was like, oh no, he was just like, oh no, I didn't want to hurt you, and then started backtracking. But yeah, it basically saved me from a very dangerous situation. And it was, so in terms of the principles of Aikido, it was being very off balance, and then have like finding a way of coming back into balance to get myself out of a dangerous situation. And then it taught me as well the power of compassion. And that actually sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, like, some people I've talked to about it since have been like, well, if he was a psychopath, it wouldn't have worked. And it's true. But in that situation, it did work for me. So, yeah.
And I mean, you've told me a little more detail about that story, and you don't need to go into it here, but I think the rest of you can probably understand the situation if you think about it. So it was a really dangerous situation, and it could have had very traumatic effects for a long time. And I think 99 out of 100 ladies would have been left with the other result, not the one you got. I'm interested to know, so I asked you what else Aikido gave you, but what are the parallels you found in your own studies? So talk to me about the things that you have studied in your own right. So you've done mindfulness. Tell me a bit more about your own other practices that you've done.
Well, my main practice is meditation. So I do mainly Vipassana meditation, which is observation of respiration and observation of body sensations. And I mean, I found that it was very complementary with Aikido, actually. And I found actually when I observe, it's kind of like, this is where your classes were very useful. And this is something that you did in one of the classes, is observing the respiration. And it just kind of like kept me centered in the practices. you know, like while I was doing them. But I found as well that, so something that I've been exploring recently, because, you know, with my work in counseling as well, is that, you know, how all of these things can be used at the right time. And I found like in certain situations, so I remember one incident last year when I was speaking with this employer, and it really activated something in me. And it's actually just before one of your classes. So I was really activated and my brain was like compulsive thinking, like, you know, they basically asked me for something like from 5 years ago that I couldn't remember the answer to. And so I was racking my brain and my emails and thinking, no, I know that, you know, I'm covered for this, but I just can't think of the answer. And I, you know, your class was coming up and I was running late and I was kind of like, shall I just want to find the answer. But then I was like, no, I'm going to go to the class and I'm just going to leave it. And it was really difficult actually being in the class because I couldn't concentrate at all. My mind was just kind of wandering. But then at some point, and this is what happens in meditation as well, is that the mind is just all over the place when you start. But then at some point, it kind of like calms. And then when that happens, what I found during the class after about 20 minutes is that the answer just came. And it, you know, reminded me of a quote by Einstein where he says something like, I think about something 100 times and nothing, and then I swim in silence and, you know, the answer or the truth comes to me. And that was exactly what I experienced. And it kind of taught me that, especially sometimes when we're very activated and the body is very activated and the mind is very activated, by doing like a physical practice, it can help calm it, you know, so that, you know, then, you know, that what needs to come up like can then come up, because you're just a little bit more calm. So that's like, you know, where I found that very helpful. But I found the whole journey of Aikido actually, like for me, like really, really interesting. And I guess maybe because, like, you know, I've had like some traumas and I'm, you know, I think they're held in my body in different places. So when I started, especially in the early days, when I was mainly doing it with Charles, but a little bit with John, I started like having a lot of dreams about, like, you know, people following me and being attacked. And to begin with, and this just came up out of the blue, and it was quite disturbing to begin with. But I just, you know, because I have my meditation practice as well, I just tried to observe what was happening. And then at some point, as I carried on like with the practices, it kind of turned. And in my dream, I was like doing Aikido on them, or I was like defending myself like verbally. And then with that, so this was kind of happening, I believe, at a more subconscious level. And then I noticed that things started changing, like my posture like changed. I wasn't, you know, I don't know, I wasn't like, I don't know, like vulnerable looking, I guess. And I've had it said to me before, like by the police when I've reported incidents like that, you know, attackers kind of target people. And I don't think it's a coincidence that I've been followed and attacked so many times. So it was really kind of like life affirming, I guess, and confidence building, to notice those changes in myself and to actually, like, I don't know, be having those dreams at a subconscious level. And then it just, you know, manifested and got more and more. So then like thoughts came to me of like, oh, actually, I quite like somebody to attack me because I really want to practice Aikido. Or like the incidents of the past would come in my head and like just like quick kind of imaginary snippets. But rather than being hit or being attacked, I would be, you know, doing Aikido of what I'd learned, and I would be protecting myself. And you know, I do believe that, you know, it was very kind of healing for me at a psychological level too.
Okay, so you've said you held this trauma in your body. Do you think to some degree you've managed to release it?
Yeah, I do. I feel I say that because I feel differently. I think that I've had like a lot of fear. and especially from my experiences, a lot of fear like held in my body. And I don't feel that so much anymore. Like not so much phases me anymore.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a personal question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But you've said you've been attacked quite a few times, and you intimated, and I think correctly, that if you look like a victim, you tend to get treated like a victim. So I'm wondering, was there anything in your developmental years that made you not maybe as confident as you could be?
Yeah, I mean, my dad was very oppressive. So like physically, verbally, emotionally, he has his own traumas. And so, there was that happened when I was very young.
Right.
And some incidents were more severe than others. But I'd say, this is what I've learned a lot, and especially because I work with Childline now, and there's a lot of children who get abused in this way.
Yep.
Is that actually, like, people put a lot of emphasis on the physical abuse, and obviously that is really important, but emotional and verbal abuse can be a lot worse when it's prolonged, and it's especially for children, because like that child, they believe everything their parents tell them. And yeah, so that had a big impact on me, and I was always like very small, like very small and like little, and it kind of just like, I don't know, then manifested in the rest of my life. So like I was bullied quite a lot, like in the park, like in school.
Right.
And like I was always, I guess my nature was also very kind of passive in a way, but maybe it was learnt behavior as well, like learning, like this is how I get myself out of like dangerous situations. I just try not to be seen.
Yeah.
I remember at the same time, like my dad telling me, or my mum telling me, that when I was pushed in the park, I would just sit there and look at the person and cry until like somebody came and shouted at the person. But it was kind of, that was like, that then perpetuated throughout my life. And whenever like I was faced with like more of an aggressive, even if it would be like more their stance or their energy field, rather than even if they said something nasty to me,
Yep.
I would just avoid them and just try to, run away from them. And then there was a point, I think I was working with a psychologist in Bolivia, and there was a woman in the Office of Social Services who was like this. And he really made me aware of it, because he was just like, well, it doesn't help you to keep running away, like just go and talk to her. And I was just like so scared. And then I was kind of like, I need to work on this pattern, and then I was kind of like, yeah, this is coming from my childhood, I need to go back and work with this. But it happened at a lot of different layers. So I did a lot of psychological work, but then the Aikido really helped with actually, like, like I put in my message that I don't know in reality if I would be able to defend myself, but my mind I'm pretty sure my mind believes that I can, because I keep on having these like imaginary scenarios where I'm like fighting people, or not, like defending myself in a way that protects myself.
In many ways, if you don't feel like a victim, you won't look like a victim. And if you don't look like a victim, that's some of the best self-defense you can have. So you probably, hopefully you won't be tested.
Yeah. And
in any real sense, I've been doing this for 37 years, and in honesty, I haven't really been tested. I went, away from the mat. So I kind of think, well, it's working for me then. That's just the way I'd like to leave it.
Yeah, I was talking with Gordon and John on Saturday, and they both said that. They're like, yeah, I never really needed to use that. I was like, yeah, I've been followed and attacked like 5 times. But I do believe that as well, that people, because I've noticed it like more at a psychological level, because the opportunity hasn't come up so much for physical attacks. But whereas before, like I think people could sense that I was an easy person to target, like to say things to. I noticed that doesn't happen so much anymore.
Yeah, I'm sure it's the case.
Yeah, or they begin and then they can sense something and then they stop. And yeah, that's been quite a big change.
Okay, so I want to pick up, yeah, go Molly,
I
go.
want to offer something here because, and it's language, but I think that what happens in Aikido is that we learn to hold center. So we neither have to be on a defensive or on an offensive. We just are holding center. So whatever comes our way, we have a skill set to respond to it. And when you're holding center, that is like a beaming beacon of energy all around 360 degrees on the being, and that projects out. And it just, anything that's potentially harmful passes by.
Yeah.
It just passes by.
Yeah. And it's a very attractive quality to those that are not looking to harm you. I want to pick up a paradox here, which is that you had this slightly traumatic upbringing, maybe very traumatic. I don't mean to demean it, only you can judge that. But you went into a professional life and were very successful there, which suggests not only were you very able, but you need a certain degree of confidence to go at that, especially in the film industry. To make it in that industry, you've got to be, well, you've got to really go for it. So tell us about that. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting actually, and something that I've kind of reflected on. Is it so what I had trauma therapy for, there was a very significant incident when I feel as a child, I separated from my authentic self and the ego developed. And so I developed a lot of perfectionist traits. Yeah, just, I used to, work all night as a child and straight A student, but I used to put a lot of pressure on myself. And then that kind of went into my career. I did the same thing, but but that's the thing, is that society rewards that. And I'm not complaining because, the film company I worked for, were very good to me. And they were a conventional company, but I used to put in a lot of hours for them. And I worked on some very successful campaigns, but it was, now that I know a bit about psychology and what's going on underneath, it's coming from perfectionism, and it's coming from dysfunctional behavior, almost.
Mm-hmm.
And so I also lived a very kind of stressful life. And I remember my last year in London, I was drinking a glass of wine every night. And that wasn't, I mean, I'm not criticizing that, but it wasn't really
me.
And I knew that it was more of a coping mechanism. And yeah, I just started breaking down, literally, and I just started having a bit of an existential crisis, really. And I was just kind of what is this all about? I was a communications director, and it was kind of well, do I carry on down this road? And but why? I don't feel happy. And what is happiness? And it just kind of opened all of these curiosities and questions. And then I was just I just need to leave. And so, but at the same time, the company went into liquidation, and it was a very kind of stressful period from that side. And it meant breaking up with my partner of a very long time. And there was a lot going against me because I lost a lot of money from it all. I didn't get redundancy pay or what I was supposed to get. But I made a commitment. So my commitment was to donate quite a large portion of my salary to charity. I remember my sister at the time saying, you don't need to do this because you're not going to get what you're anticipating. But because I made up my mind that was what I was going to do, I was no, I'm going to do it. So I did it, and then it meant that I was traveling in Latin America on £250 a month. And so I was doing volunteering and but that's how I started hitchhiking. And yeah, it just kind of opened up a new world to me, because I really started Latin America is such a kind of different culture, and people were so open, and they're a lot more connected with their hearts. And I just started like, the ego that had become so strong, it was just completely shaken. And, it took me a long time. But I realized that happiness doesn't come from, like all of this, ego success. It comes from something much deeper, and love, ultimately.
Okay, so I feel there's like a slight missing bit here. So you had this very successful career, things are going swimmingly, you have a bit of a mental wobble and realize there's kind of a separation in yourself between what you really are and who you're, I'm going to say the word pretending, but it might not be entirely appropriate, this mask that you've built for yourself. So you give it all up, you give away most of your money, you lose your long-term partner. At that stage, what did you decide to do? I mean, you said, well, I'm gonna go traveling around South America. I mean, how did that happen?
I didn't really have a plan. I just like it was like it called me. I just like thought, I was just like, I want to go to Latin America. I couldn't.
So was it a tourism thing, or I can go and help out in?
Well, yeah, the first thing that I planned was to volunteer in an orphanage in Peru. Right. Okay. So I did that for 6 weeks. And that was life-changing in itself, because I went in with like all of my head full of my own problems. And then, I just remember these like significant moments when these very vulnerable children whose parents had like abandoned them due to things like drug abuse just looked at me with so much love. And it just made me let go of all my own stuff and, just be more present, I guess, with what I was doing and connecting more with my heart. And I think that a lot of my journey in Latin America was about that, was like getting out of my mind and connecting more with my heart and like the deeper parts of myself, like for what I really wanted, not the person that my family wanted me to be, not the person that everybody else wanted me to be, but who did I want to be? And I didn't know for a really long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what else did you do on your travels there? So you worked at the orphanage. At some point you decided it's time to move on to the next thing. What was the next thing?
Yeah, again, it was really curious. So I wasn't planning to go to Machu Picchu. And then somehow it happened and I went there. And I met a girl who said she was volunteering in the Bolivian Amazon. And I was like, oh, I would like to do that in the Office of Social Services. I didn't have any experience in this. So I wrote to the director. She invited me to go. So I went and just lived in the Bolivian Amazon for like 2 or 3 months and worked in the Office of Social Services. And like, they were really kind of like severe cases like of abuse. And it just broke my heart. Because at that time as well in Bolivia, there wasn't many laws protecting people. And so actually this then ultimately led to me setting up my charity, because I felt helpless when I was there. And even, there's so much corruption and self-interest that I was just like, who's actually helping these children, but then I knew that I couldn't, because I wasn't, I didn't have the experience, I didn't have the knowledge or any of that. So then I carried on and I traveled in Brazil. And, so I had quite a serious like attack there. Like when I was in Brazil, I was staying in it with a host and I was sleeping. So in some ways, this was kind of one of the, like hardest ones, because when you're sleeping, you're in quite a vulnerable state. And like the brother of my host, like tried to attack me. And, I managed to get out of it, but it was very kind of, because there was nobody else in the house. I couldn't, it was just by screaming. That was all I did really. It really kind of like pushed me to challenge myself, because it was kind of make or break. Like where I stayed in Bolivia, like the family there like almost adopted me like a daughter. So when they found out about this, they were like, come back here and we'll look after you. But then I was kind of like, I don't want to be looked after. Like, I want to kind of like look after myself and learn. I don't want to like be afraid. Yeah. And so then I just kind of, I don't know, like just carried on and almost like, so I carried on hitchhiking. I carried on, doing all the things that I'd had bad experiences from, but also finding the good experiences like from them. Like I made really strong connections with people. It just kind of helped me to, because I think if I hadn't done that, I would have had a very kind of skewed view of the world from my experiences.
So you carried on through Brazil and then you came home, or?
No, so I ended up traveling in Latin America for 18 months. So I went through Brazil, Paraguay. I traveled most. Argentina, I was in for quite a while, Chile, and then I went back up through Peru, went back to the orphanage for a while, and then I came back to the
How did you pay your way as you went on these travels? Were you just working in various voluntary organizations, or what?
Yeah, so well, I just had £250 a month. So that was my budget. Like, so basically, I had some, and then my dad agreed to help me and I would pay him back. But it was that I knew I had £250 a month, and that's what I had to manage on. So I just made it work like from that. But because I was hitchhiking a lot, and Latin American people are very, very like open and generous, and especially, I don't know, countries like Brazil, they just see it as such an honor, especially with a foreigner. And so people would just always be inviting me, for things like all the time. And then because I was doing a lot of voluntary work too, I was supported in that way too. But helped me see things like outside of like monetary exchange, like more like like the circle of giving is wide. You give to people when you give to people with words, you give to people with like love, you give to people with many things that you have in that moment, and then other people give to you and you receive. And because I think in British culture it's much more stiff, and people are a bit more, it's a bit more like transactional. Like, oh, someone gave me something, I better give something back to them.
Well, I think that's generally true in the Western world. We kind of lost that link with humanity, really. We've become very transactional, as you say.
So this one experience, and I was like that too, to an extent. So I had this experience when I was in Honduras. It was on another trip, but I basically like couldn't get any money out of the ATM, and I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then the immigration said, oh, this guy can take you to the next village and you can try there. So I went with him, and then on the road they see like the nephew, and he jumps in the car, like big like black man, but very friendly. And so I try to get in the ATM. He's chatting to me, and ATM's not working, and I'm just like, well, I have no money. I don't know. It's getting to nighttime, and it's like San Pedro Sula, which is the most dangerous city in Honduras. And I was just like, well, I'm just going to speak to the bus driver and explain that I don't have any money and just see what happens. And so we went to the buses, and no buses were going. And so I was like, well, I'm going to hitchhike. Like, I don't have any option. And they were just like, no, you're not hitchhiking. And so the guy was like to me, like, we're going to give you money. And I was like, no, because I could tell that they weren't very well off. So I was just like, no, I don't want to accept your money. And then they were like, right, okay, well, the nephew was like, okay, come and stay in my house. And I could tell that there was this tension and argument happening in another language. And I felt really uncomfortable. So I stayed in the nephew's house. And next day I said to him, what was that argument about? And he was like, well, basically it was because you wouldn't accept the money. My uncle was getting really offended. And I was like, well, it was because I felt like you didn't have much and I didn't feel like it was right. And he was like, in our culture, it's really kind of like if someone offers you something, it's from the heart. And if you don't accept it, it's quite kind of like, that's quite hurtful. And it helped me see things differently. And then after that, whenever anybody offered me anything, I would accept it gratefully, rather than, projecting my own, whatever mental condition prior.
So, I mean, to me, there's a huge parallel with Aikido here. You give love, you get love. If that's how you handle conflict, you still you find a way to resolve it. If you meet violence with violence, you might solve it for a second or two, but you haven't solved the problem, really. Okay, so this was a transformative experience. You came back a different person with a clearer idea of who you wanted to be. So tell us about the charity you founded.
Yeah, so I did this in like 2016. I did a TEDx talk, and then I launched it during that TEDx talk. And I didn't know if it was going to work out, to be honest. I was just like, this is something I feel strongly about, especially after my experience in Bolivia. And so I was like, I'm going to try. And I'm just going to see what happens. And so I thought, well, I'll go back to that village in Bolivia because I know, at least I know a little bit about the what's going on there. I know the Office of Social Services, like there's potentially a little bit of support for me. So that's how I planned it. But I went first to the favelas of Rio. So my first talk I gave in the favelas of Rio, and that was a really interesting experience because I got there, I got to the airport, I was doing couch surfing, and my host messaged me and was like, oh yeah, I think you're going to have to sleep at the airport tonight because the mayor has been shot. And so basically the whole city is in shutdown. And yeah, it's not really very safe for you to leave the airport tonight. So I was like, oh, okay. So I slept in the airport. And then the next day I went to, go and find like his house. And I it's really funny, like, well, interesting because I could just sense this like energy and vibration of fear, like like in these parts of Rio de Janeiro. And then when I met my host, I was telling him, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the favelas and teach about human rights, and he was like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. And I was like, oh, why not? And he was like, well, the mayor just got shot. Like the gangs control the favelas and you'll be putting yourself in a lot of danger if you do that. So I was like, okay. So then I was like, at the last minute, like, oh, what shall I do? So then I was like, okay, well, environment was my other subject. So I ended up teaching the children about sustainability and the environment. But it was
which
quite
children? So, because if it's not in the favelas, which children were you teaching?
Yeah, so this was in the favelas.
Was
It
okay.
was it was one of the biggest favelas that was there, but it was a really nice group, and it really inspired me because so I said to them, like, what do you think will happen if we don't look after the planet? And the youngest little boy, like 8 years old, just looked at me and was like, we'll die. And I was just like, oh yeah, you're pretty cottoned on. And then he just started telling me about how it's really important because we depend on the water systems and they need to be clean, otherwise how are we going to get clean drinking water? And I was like, yeah, you should be giving this talk, really. Yeah, they just had a lot of good intention. So like at the end of the talk, we were like, oh, so one thing that we can do this week for the environment. And they were like, I'm gonna just bring my water bottle, and I'm not gonna buy like plastic. I'm not gonna use plastic. And then another one was like, because meat is a big thing in Latin America, another one was like, I'm not gonna eat meat one day a week. And yeah, they were just coming up with ideas and things that whether they do it or not is another thing, but that the intention during the class was like, yeah, we want to do this.
So why was it safe for you to go into the favelas teaching that as opposed to what your original intention was?
Because I guess like human rights, like because I asked about this like when I was hitchhiking and speaking to different people. Human rights is just a really touchy subject because they basically don't want people to be educated on that. The government don't, the gangs don't, like nobody does really. And so it's it was just like, so it was specifically the subject of human rights.
Okay, I've got it. Okay, so I've got a bit lost. Have we started the charity?
Yeah, so this was my first charity project. So it was in the favelas. And then at the same time I was writing an article on how I could balance my carbon footprint from my travels. So then I traveled overland, and so I traveled overland through Brazil and then up to Bolivia, the Bolivian Amazon. And then it just worked out really well. So I worked with the Office of Social Services, and there was a psychologist that I really kind of like aligned with. Like he was a humanist psychologist, so he was quite grounded in spiritual practice, or not grounded in it, but like he was like, oh, meditation, like that's like, let's collaborate kind of a thing. You can be like my co-therapist kind of a thing. And so like I was sitting with him, like, and they're very severe cases there. But what was really interesting was like, so there's one story where like this woman, she'd killed her husband, and she was in the Office of Social Services, and there was a lot of judgment on her, you know, that you've done this, like you're a really bad person. And then, you know, the psychologist was like, why don't you do yoga with her? So I was like, okay, yeah, sure. So I was doing it. And before, I was talking to her and, you know, trying to understand the situation a bit better. And I basically like learned that it was like self-defense, that he was going to attack her, you know, sexually. And so she kind of like pulled out a knife, didn't mean to, and then it happened. She'd been found innocent by the court and all of this. And so part of my work with her just ended up being trying to like let go of that judgment that she was also putting on herself, like partly as well because like she had like a newborn baby, and you know I was kind of, so part of, you know, I was kind of like, well, how, you know, how can you give love to this baby if you don't have love for yourself? And it was really interesting after, because then the next week, like she was sitting there and one of the girls was like, oh, like this lady's here. And I was like, oh, is she here to see the psychologist, but he's not here? They're like, no, she's here to see you. She wants a yoga class. So I was like, oh, okay. And so we just worked in this way, like with the, you know, like calming the body, and like giving love, like, you know, like to the self. And yeah, it was, yeah, there were just like some like quite like rewarding experiences like that just came up out of the blue. And then
you just touched on another huge parallel with Aikido for me, which is that for me, the training is all about developing yourself. You can't sort your own problems out. Your ability to connect with others is really limited. So the only way you can find harmony with somebody else is if you find harmony with yourself. If you can learn to live with yourself, everything starts there.
Yeah.
Talk to me a bit more about meditation. What does meditation do for you?
I've had some really I've completely changed as a person. And meditation like is what's done it at the deepest level. So I did my first like Vipassana course, and I know it's not for everybody. It's quite kind of like hardcore. But I did my first course like after my mum had been diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. I was her primary carer. I had a lot of pressure on, and especially because of my family dynamics, I wasn't really getting a lot of like, I didn't feel a lot of appreciation. And I went to do this course while my mum was having a vasectomy, which she was like supportive of, because she was like, you know, you need to look after yourself because you're my primary carer kind of a thing. It was really hard. I had a lot of turbulence, like physically, emotionally, mentally, but something happened. And when I finished the course, I just stopped being emotionally like, so, well, like I was very emotionally reactive and probably a bit neurotic where before I did it. And the extent of the emotional reactivity like just stopped. So before I would like, you know, the littlest thing and I would start crying, and I would be crying for like hours and I wouldn't be able to stop it. And it just went. And I'm pretty sure it was by observing the sensations in my body, and the emotional reactivity was being caused because I was reacting to these sensations in my body. And when I was meditating, I learned to be equanimous with it. And to some level, I was reacting a lot as well. But to some level, I learned to be more balanced with it. And yeah, so it just went. And then it was really interesting. So then when I went to Bolivia and I was working with the psychologist and I was seeing all of these cases, I was just, I didn't carry on with the practice after that for like 8 months. But then I was just kind of like, well, if they just learnt meditation, they would just get to the root of the problem and like everything could be sorted. Because I learned with psychology, it's important, you know, it's important, counseling's important, but it's very surface level. Whereas with like, you know, body stuff or like, you know, meditation at a body level, you're going like much deeper into the unconscious. And you know, and then like the change and the yeah, what you're able to, your resilience, like all of these things that I was struggling with, like emotional resilience, like it just kind of like gave me a support with all of that. And then after that I continued like, you know, with the practice, and it was kind of like, it was alongside Aikido, it really was something that I don't know, like took me to another place, like during the pandemic. Like to begin with, I was very reactive myself, like with all of the stuff in the news, like with how everybody was behaving, all of this. I knew I was being reactive. And then like at some point I just let go. I started doing the Aikido practices. I started like meditating much more, and especially at full moon. Like somehow I was waking up at like 3-4 in the morning and meditating. And like I started to realize that all of these are just a lot of this is mental games, like, and I was just like, the more you kind of engage with it, the more you're like, it's not helping anything. And so it's better just to kind of like keep a little bit of space from it and just, find center within yourself. Like, so for me with Aikido and also with meditation, and just be more balanced in a very unbalanced world. Like just do that for now, that's fine. So yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I think of meditation as being quite in the mind, but you've made a very clear link with the body and how the body affects the mind and vice versa. And that practice is effectively a balancing or centering practice, seems to me.
Yeah, well, actually, like, so with Vipassana meditation, the start is the mind, because the mind is very dominant. But then you'll go, not your goal, but you're trying to get out of your mind, because the truth is in the body. The truth is in the body sensations. Right. But your mind will always come up with, so you can't trust your mind. And in psychology, this is supported. Like 99% of your thoughts are completely inaccurate, because they're going through, a mental conditioning process. And it's your kind of subjective reality, not necessarily the truth of the situation. But your body sensations, like, that's the truth of what you're feeling at this moment in time. And that's also like really helped me. It's taken me a long time, don't get me wrong, but like just coming out of the mind, I'm just like, oh, everything's so peaceful. Like, and I realized that actually, like, it's my mind that is just making everything like so kind of like more stressful than it needs to be. So yeah.
I'm going to ask you what you want to be doing with your charity work. So tell us about the pursuit of happiness as a charity, what its goals are. And then I'm going to open it up to everybody else, because I'm sure that they've got lots to ask.
So, I mean, ultimately, so for my work in Latin America, I was very honoured to be selected as a finalist for the St. David's Awards with the Welsh Government. And they kind of asked me this question too. And ultimately what it came down to was like, just giving, like compassion and giving, like from the heart. Because actually, and like, so with my work, I want to do workshops when I walk the Ganges in the communities. And so one of the other classes that, I'm hoping to do is on compassion. Because one of the things that I've really learned, like from my work, like, so I work with Greenpeace, Amnesty International, like with all of these organizations, at a higher level, if you act from a place of love, and you come out of your head and your conditioned mind and negative thoughts, like a lot of these problems can be solved. And what I saw a lot as well with like activism is that there's also a dark side to it, like where it's very kind, not all, but in some places, it can be rooted in like a lot of anger and projection. And, for me, it almost kind of like, and I guess with meditation, I kind of saw that was perpetuating the problem. Because like what you were talking about with Aikido, like, anger breeds anger, and it's like you meet conflict with conflict, and, whereas, and I have experimented with this. So I did a talk recently and it was on the environment, but I did it very unconventionally. I just talked about love, and I, connecting with the heart. So I did like a heart meditation, with all of these like scientists and like academic people, and my point with it, and then I said like, this verse at the end, I'm not kind of like, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, but this verse at the end, which is, love is patient, love is kind. I can't remember the rest of it, but just on the premise that, if we just kind of work with this, like, you're not going to be doing harm to other people, you're not going to be doing harm to the environment. And actually, like, how we're treating the environment, how we're treating other people, is because that is how we feel about ourselves. So actually the first step is to learn how to love ourselves. So that kind of like then started to form the core of my like charity work, that actually like, and especially with like children, you know, like teaching children to like, you know, like love themselves. And because so many children, and I know this from my work with Childline, you know, especially with modern society and technology, they are taught that they are not good enough, they are not lovable, and it's just causing so many problems at the moment. And then when you've got, so this is, for me, this is the root of it. So when you've got all of this going on, it then perpetuates into like, you know, human rights abuses, environmental abuses, because people have got all of these traumas and stuff going on, and it just all gets projected outwards. Or apathy, you know, like people are just like, I can't look at that because just got too much of my own stuff going on. Whereas, you know, when you then work with yourself a little bit and then connect with your heart, can you really like, you know, look at someone suffering and just not do anything? Or like, and even you don't do anything, but can you, you know, like just feel like, I really want to give this person some love. They're suffering right now.
How do you embed the legacy of the workshop after you leave?
Like, you know, after I leave this world.
No, I mean, so if you go along the Ganges and you're visiting all these villages and towns, and you carry out a workshop with whoever you manage to bring along to the workshop. For me, Aikido is, you know, if they come to Aikido mat once, they can hear some great ideas, but unless they keep coming back and practicing it, it's not really going to bear fruit. How does the workshop lead to bearing fruit? How does it change long term?
I think that, I mean, what I learned from because I did a similar thing when I was in Latin America. And what I learned from it is that, I mean, maybe it will be very surface level, but so like one of the, you know, and I wasn't expecting this, but so the workshops I gave in the Bolivian Amazon on the environment, the people living in the environment didn't realize the importance of the trees. Like they didn't realize that they were important. And so one of the most important things that came from that was one of the teachers was like, had this initiative, like, yeah, let's write a letter to the mayor that we all want to plant trees. And, you know, maybe at like a practical level, it's more important not to cut the trees down, but it was planting the seeds that these trees are important. We're going to plant them. And, you know, like that, like just like, I don't know, I guess like more like not changing, but like planting the seeds for like a new way of thinking. And so for me, like in India,
yeah,
a really important thing for me will be human rights and women's rights. And so I think like just a woman walking on her own along the Ganges, going into villages and giving talks is going to do something, because it's not normal. And it's, you know, it's, you know, like it's, I don't know, I think that sometimes like, yeah, it's planting the seeds and,
okay,
you know, and then leaving it to the community to
beautifully answered. Your heritage, is it Pakistani or Indian?
Indian.
Okay, so that's why the Ganges as opposed to maybe somewhere else.
Yeah, and also like from my meditative practice,
Right.
like I just felt quite kind of like drawn like to the Ganges. And yeah, it's interesting. So the first talk that I gave for International Women's Day, I gave a Q&A at the end, and there was this Indian woman there, and I was, you know, saying that Latin America is going to be the first place that I go, and she was like, well, why wouldn't you go to India? You know, like this is your roots. And like, and you know, she could see it as well. She was like, you know, for people to see like a woman like, you know, like traveling on her own and you know, not being afraid, you know, like that's going to do like you know, so much for the for the people, for the culture. And also, so like I did this like travel where I traveled home with no money, and it became quite big news in India, which was quite surprising because I didn't go to India. Just because like I was an Indian woman and I was just doing something that nobody in India had ever heard of before, but like breaking boundaries, because there is a lot of oppression of women in India. And I mean, it's a dangerous, it's dangerous in some ways for women too, which is why I wanted to learn Aikido. But so like in that responsible way, I wanted to show like that, freedom's very important at many levels, like spiritual, mental, physical, but it's also important to know how to protect yourself, like in some way, and not do it, which I think I have done a little bit in the past, like a little irresponsibly, and not know how to protect yourself and do quite dangerous things. So yeah, it's just so I guess
goes a long way, Rhinal.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, so something that I'm quite conscious of with giving workshops and like like teaching, so to speak, is like, like, I don't know, not imposing things on others, but rather like planting seeds and leading by example, and then letting people take what they want from it, rather than being like, this is how things should be, yeah, and especially with meditation, I kind of very much believe that change comes from within, at your pace, when you're ready. And all people can do is like plant seeds, show others, like storytelling. I love that, storytelling and showing like other ways of being. Like for many people in different countries, they don't have the opportunity to travel. So if everybody in your community, everybody in your family has like lived in a certain way, you marry when you're young, this is your life, how do you know anything different unless you see somebody doing something different?
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, you've sown a lot of seeds here. Let's see what fruit it's borne. So, ladies and gents, I'm hoping that you're going to ask some insightful questions. Charles, I knew you would.
Yeah, well, I don't know about insightful. I mean, thank you. That's very interesting, fascinating hearing what's behind, and thank you for coming and doing this. Thank you for Quentin for inviting Rhinal to do it. I want to ask a very simple question, really, which you must have come to Aikido, to my class initially, with a certain amount of preconceptions. You obviously had a sense of it was something you were interested in. What most surprised you?
I found it very hard to begin with. Like there were a lot of challenges, like actually the technique, learning something new, and this is what I was talking with John and Gordon about on Saturday, like learning something new late at night, like that really challenged me. Well, for me, late at night. It was, like with Aikido, what I've learned about it is that it's so simple, yet it's so kind of complicated in a way, like to get your head around. Like once you get your head around it, you can see the simplicity of it. But to begin with, I guess because like you're moving your body in such a different way than what you're used to, it was, that part of it. And then, as I say, like, because like it was affecting me as well at a psychological level too. Like I think that was probably, like weighing down on me too a little bit, and just working through all of these things. But then there was a definite breaking point where, I was like, oh yeah, I think I get the basics of it now, and it got easier.
I've got to come in here. So it was actually quite painful in some ways to sort of do this Aikido practice, because it was bringing out traumas in you. Where did you find the strength to push through? Because lots of people don't.
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, I know that I don't know if Charles remembers, but I do remember going to some of his classes and being like, and he's like, how's your week been? I've been like, not good. And I didn't really fully understand it, like what was happening, I just kind of, I'm quite a determined person. I don't like giving up on things. I just thought, and like, the teachers like Charles and John, to begin with, because they were my first teachers, they were always very supportive. I felt like kind of like safe in my, ignorance of Aikido, like they didn't really know what I was doing, and that, it was just finding it like, and there were other people in the class that were starting at the same level as me with Charles's class. And I think Charles brought it down to much more simplicity, to begin with, especially, that kind of like just like kind of helped a bit more, like almost like baby language, like, like beginner's guide to Aikido kind of a thing. So yeah, it was just that. But in a way, I guess, like, maybe it helped me that I didn't really understand to begin with, like, what was happening at a psychological level. I just knew that I was getting disturbed a lot. And then, like, you know, as things were healing, then I was like, oh, that's what that is. That's what's happening. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes, Quentin, can I
Go
just
for it,
say
John.
first
Yeah.
of all, you had a very easy ride on this one.
I've had that a lot of times, John. I just ask the question and shut up.
And also, I shall be visiting Cardiff in next Easter for 4 days. I'll be teaching there, so I'm looking forward to meeting Rhinal there then. And lastly, after 18 months of training with all of us, does she think that she might invest in a Aikido suit and a jo?
I quite like my broomstick. And I told you I'm a self-certified pink belt. If I go on the mat, I definitely will. But yes, I just haven't got round to it. But I know that you really want me to, and you'll be so happy the day that I come to class with this on.
Well, it will. You can use it for your meditating as well. It's lovely to meditate in.
I'll do my best. Okay.
Anybody else? Joe?
Yes, it was very interesting, all of your background, Rhinal. Basically, your experiences in Brazil, because it's quite a challenging coming here. And even for me, that I'm from São Paulo, every time that I go to Rio, driving to Rio, arriving in Rio, it's always very stressful. So it's really a place to be visited, of course, to be there. It's an amazing city, but it's quite challenging for everyone. So I really resonate with what you told. And just one thing that really changed me a lot for you, as John asked you about buying your bokken and your jo and your gi. Here, basically, we never had our tools, so it was always from the dojo. And having my own tools right now, mostly in the pandemic, it changed completely my relationship with the tools. Because before that, I think I told Quentin a couple of times, it was just some people running towards me with a piece of wood trying to hit me on the mat, you know? So it changed me really. I got very, very close to these tools. They are very special. And they say it's just an extension of our bodies.
Yeah.
So I really support you if you get yours, because they're special. They are our trustful partners.
That's interesting. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, every stick has its own character. Every jo has its own character, and bokken and tanto too. But when I was picking out my jo, there were about 15 choices. And it was just kind of like holding him and moving him and feeling him. And then the one that came home with me, it was like it spoke. Take me home with you. It was like a clear, the way it felt in my hands, the way it felt like it was an extension of my body, of my handedness. It was just an extension. And same thing with the bokken. And sometimes I have the opportunity to use other people's weapons, right? I tend to not take them with me when I travel. And so I have somebody else's jo, particularly jo. The bokken's challenging for my handedness, but the jo, and they're all so different. They're different, and some are like welcoming, and some are like, yeah, you go ahead and try that with me. You know, anyway, the wood speaks.
Well, there you go. If you want a new friend, buy a jo.
Yeah, definitely.
So, any other questions or comments on what we've heard tonight? Anything resonate with you particularly?
just resonating how Aikido affects how we are out in the world in such a positive way.
Yeah.
You know, to me, like everybody should be training in Aikido. Or, you know, it's like,
and soon, please. What resonates for me, Rhinal, is the fact that I love the fact that you've actually not been on a mat yet. And that much of your journey has had nothing to do with Aikido at all, but you found some of the truths of Aikido without knowing it belonged to Aikido at the time. It's only when you came online that, oh yeah, I've done some of this stuff before. And I, you know, if people watch this video afterwards, and I hope they will, that's the message I want to take. That the power of Aikido is not just about what you do on the mat. That's immensely helpful, but it's not the only way up the mountain. And the principles that you adopted and found before anyway are just powerful life principles, and that they're good ways to live. We all want to find them and live by them. So well done you, because your determination is fantastic, and your open-mindedness is amazing, and your open heart is amazing. I think you have a lot to teach.
Thank you. Yeah, I you know what, one thing that I would say about that, because often people say that to me, and one thing that I try to say to people, because I think it's important, is that it was a journey. I wasn't always like that. But it's a journey that's worthwhile, because I'm much happier, and I realized that actually, like, you know, which is why it's so important to me, that when you connect with your heart, and when you kind of like, you know, clear yourself out a little bit, because usually it's all of these negative experiences that cause you to have negative filters, then actually, like, you know, like now people say to me, oh, you're like quite a positive, like thinking person. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, that was a journey. I wasn't always like that. And you can do it too. Everybody can, you know, and I do believe that that's what's going to make the world a better place.
Hear, hear. I think so say all of us, don't we? Yeah, we do.
yeah.
Have you anything you'd like to ask us? You have a bright assembly of quite a lot of Aikido experience here.
I guess maybe it would be interesting to know. Like what does Aikido like mean? Because I know what I talked with John and Gordon about on Saturday is that like Aikido, different people come to Aikido for like different reasons. Yeah, so I guess like what does Aikido like mean to you? And especially during the pandemic, because it's not been the same, right?
Okay, let's go around the room and find out, shall we? So just 30 to 60 seconds at most, starting with Molly.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Whoa, Aikido, well, it's base. It's the base from which all movement comes out of me. It's what it seems like. And so with the pandemic, there really wasn't much of a hiccup for me. I just go about my life responding to what's ever in front of me. And I don't know, it's been a lifesaver for 37 years. It's been my root.
Go see the YouTube session that we did with Molly about her story, and you'll understand more. Okay. Joe, what about you?
Well, a lot of things, but a little bit like Molly, it's the source. So every single layer right now, I go back to the source and do whatever the work I need to do in any situations, doing what am I learning, or everything. It's about it. So it's a lifestyle shift changing. There is no way to do without it.
And I think it's fair to say, Joe, that the pandemic's opened up all sorts of doors for you that wouldn't probably have opened otherwise.
Oh yeah.
Well, I think mostly everyone that I've met in all of those Zoom sessions, I have never heard about any of them before. And some of my teachers here know some of you, but otherwise I have never heard about anything. So it was only Brazil and basically Yamada in New York, which was from the organization that my group is.
Yeah,
that's it. So it opened.
Yeah,
Steve,
we're everywhere.
Yes, and I'm really, and it's kind of open to a world that I feel that I belong a lot. So it's really lovely to be here.
Steve, what's Aikido meant to you?
It means the way I live, what I do from day to day. All my thoughts, I try to enhance others' lives by keeping my life in some sort of order as well. So it's kind of the way one lives. And
Very
try,
nice.
yeah.
Very good. Charles?
Yeah, I have to say, I always hate this question. I mean, I
Yeah.
agree with everything everyone said, but it's like asking a bird what air is. You know, it is,
Yeah.
it's me. I started doing it because I wanted to do a meditation and I got bored of sitting and I was told this is a moving meditation, but it becomes so much more. It's, you know, it is, when the pandemic started, I thought, how can I possibly not do Aikido? And had to find a way of doing it and had to think a way around it, as many of us have. Because it's, you know, to stop would be like stopping breathing.
Yeah.
Perfect answer. John?
Well, Aikido has helped me through many tough times in life, depression and bereavement. It's always been there. It's been a sort of cave for me to crawl into to find solace. So it's always been there for me. So it always gives back and it will always be there. And also the last 18 months with learning to teach online has been a fantastic new experience for me, as it has for many others. And I've learned an awful lot from it.
Thanks, John. And for my part, Aikido offers powerful principles for developing self and for developing connection with the rest of the world, really. I can't think of anything more important than that to spend your time doing. So that's how it was before, and that's how it's been throughout the pandemic. And what the pandemic did was it gave me the chance to spread that message about Aikido, something bigger than just the martial technique we do. It's a set of ideas that can be used in any situation, you know, particularly resolving conflict within and conflict without. Yeah, so it's a way of finding balance and harmony with whatever comes up in front of you. And that sounds like a great place to leave it, though I say it myself. So I just want to thank you so much, Rhinal, for giving us your time, because if she hadn't been here, she'd have been working out on Childline, which is a charity thing helping children who are having a tough time. So we're grateful that you managed to switch the shift for us.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a real honor to because I don't have any Aikido experience really, but yeah, hopefully it's been useful in some other ways.
Yeah, and I hope you'll keep us posted on the progress with Pursuit of Happiness. You know, you feel free to keep us in touch with the journey and what you're doing, and maybe you might glean some support from here that you wouldn't otherwise have got.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you.
All right. I will bid you all good night.